Today on Lightning Bugs, mentors, curation, education, benefactors, all of that stuff. We don't make things in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. We make things on the shoulders of something else. And I think that you probably have a unique perspective into that. That's my question.
Wow, that is a very big question, and it gets to the core of why museums matter and why this stuff is important. Rock and roll, very broad statement. Music connects us. At its very best and its very strongest. It connects us with a shared experience of hearing the same songs or going to the same shows, or maybe it wasn't the same artist, but it was the same vibe that people had. So there's important elements there, and I do want to talk about that because that's the power of the museum itself. It's not so much the artifacts within it, it's the emotional reservoir that everybody has that gets turned loose when they're there. That's the museum. But when you go to artists, and I believe in the creative process, you are the sum total of what all the inputs you've had. Right. What were those kitchen Sunday morning things that were being played in your house? What did you listen to with your friends? What things did you go to when you were finding yourself? And all of that, I think, builds this foundational piece.
Hi, if you're enjoying listening to Lightning Bugs, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It helps a lot. It's Thursday again, and you're listening to another episode of Lightning Bugs. My guest today is Greg Harris, President and CEO of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Greg has had an impressive career as the co-founder of a successful vinyl record store, the Vice President of Development at the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum, and now as the leader of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Greg and I crossed paths in 2014 during my efforts to save RCA Studio A here in Nashville from demolition. Greg wrote an amazing letter of support that got lots of attention here and around the world and helped turn the tide for our cause. His passion for history and music led us to have a really wonderful conversation. Y'all listen up and learn something. 1, 2. Greg Harris, thanks for joining us. It's good to see you.
Bennett, it's entirely my pleasure. I'm honored to be sitting here with you. And I want to thank you for helping our young artists that we have at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You did a workshop for them. And I spoke to some after, and then they did some presentations. And it was truly transformational for them. The idea that somebody with your experience and accolades would spend time to work with them, that alone means a world to a young artist. And then to be providing really poignant critique, both positive and where to improve, that's so meaningful. So I'm grateful on behalf of them and everybody at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. And I have a few things to thank you for as well. For me, I didn't have any rock and roll mentors. And the reason I didn't was because if they weren't selling records anymore, they weren't cool and they were old. And I didn't want to hear anything they had to say come out of their old no record selling mouths. But I feel like we're in a different era right now. And that if I were coming along now, I could more understand what you're doing, which is connecting the generations to a degree. So even though I was going to start by talking about the RCA Studio and your help with that, I'm going to move forward because of what you just brought up and really just have you tell us your thoughts on the making of art. This is real broad. It's not the normal kind of question for me, but the making of art on the shoulders of so many others, historically, currently, mentors, curation, education, benefactors, all of that stuff. We don't make things in a vacuum. We make things on the shoulders of something else. And I think that you probably have a unique perspective into that? That's my question.
Wow, that is a very big question, and it gets to the core of why museums matter and why this stuff is important. And what I guess to ease into an answer, the rock and roll, a very broad statement, music connects us. At its very best and its very strongest, it connects us with a shared experience of hearing the same songs or going to the same shows, or maybe it wasn't the same artist, but it was the same vibe that people had. So there's important elements there, and I do want to talk about that because that's the power of the museum itself. It's not so much the artifacts within it; it's the emotional reservoir that everybody has that gets turned loose when they're there. So that's the museum. But when you go to artists, and I believe in how the creative process, you are the sum total of what all the inputs you've had. What were those kitchen Sunday morning things that were being played in your house? What did you listen to with your friends? What things did you go to when you were finding yourself? And all of that, I think, builds this foundational piece. And then there's a natural idea of wanting to, be independent and break from all that.
That was my generation. Yeah, didn't want to learn anything.
No, but I have a feeling when you listen today, you start to hear those influences. And at that time, it was important to stake your claim and to plant your flag. But really, it was on the others. And in rock and roll, if you think about, I don't know, I'm a big Clash fan. Now, listening to it 35, 40 years later, they were recording I Fought the Law, a dozen years after Bobby Fuller and a little while after the Crickets, right? Like it's closer to that than it is.
It's so much closer. I know, isn't that's amazing to me?
And sound wise, it was revolutionary to us in 1979. But when you listen now, it sounds a heck of a lot like the others. It's pretty wild.
It is wild. I had this weird. It's the weirdest thing. I woke up really sad from this weird dream that I can't really even explain, except it had to do with Frampton Comes Alive. And in my dream, I think because I had experienced life as a touring musician and had demystified it all, I was hearing the album in my mind in a different way than the magic that I heard it through in 1976 as a 10-year-old.
Yeah.
When I was 10 years old in 1976, I heard, maybe they're smoking pot out there. Who are all these people? It's all cool. It's so electric. The miracle of electricity. It's wide and stereo and he knows shit. And there's groupies backstage and drugs. And seemed really like mysterious and exciting. All I could hear was like in my mind, all of a sudden in my dream, because I knew it now and it was in a different perspective, was the duct tape, stinky beer, spilled for ages, like farting roadies, and just it wasn't all of the magic in a way was gone. And when we're living through it, it's one thing, and then you go back to it and you're like, it was real. It wasn't.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's really on your same page there, but something about that is, because it sounds like blues now. The Clash sounds like some old blues band to me now, and it didn't sound like that then.
I see the so you need that spark ignited, and that that double live record did it for you. It in that mystery, and you created something. It's one of the. I don't know. I love baseball, and baseball on the radio. You create the scene. You picture it, and you remember the moments far more than when you watch it on television because you've created that scene. And music is like that when you've listened at that moment. But I do think the demystification part is really intriguing because somewhere you had to go from being a fan to you got the inside look from whether you were playing, open mics or places, and you start to get an inside look on how it worked, and you realize, this, I can do this. And I think that's super important for people, whether they're going into the arts or even business or other areas that you have to be creative. You have to realize that these aren't faceless things that happen by magic. There's a magic in the product, but that it's people behind all of it. They're not venues. There's all these backstage people. There's ticketing. There's all that. And there's load in. And then there's all these things that happen. And when you demystify it, I don't think it's unhealthy, because it lets a person know that I can fit into this somewhere.
You're a history-based organization that is looking forward, because you're taking kids who are you're teaching, and at the same time you're looking back. And I know the reason that's interesting to me is because I believe that my fear, and a lot of musicians' fear, at least of my era, was of getting too caught in the rules of the past. Like if I saw one more VH1 show about how great the 60s were, I was just going to explode. Like, I fuck the 60s. I want to make something new.
Yeah.
But now I don't feel that way. It's either because I have experience, or because maybe I just want to see the kids actually learn something so they can be free to create something new.
Well, it gets back to the foundation, and then that important idea, though, right? Artists have to be that voice of change, and you have to push forward. But to move back to the museum, so I've now been in museums for, I think, 26 or 27 years, and I was at I was at the Baseball Hall of Fame, and and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for 26 of those years. And the way that it happens is we're trading in history, but it's also pop culture, and it's changing every day. So there's games being played, there's people recording music, there's concerts happening, there's all ages that you need to appeal to. And there's a magic there where you can't just be a history museum about the stuff, because we're a history museum and we're an art museum. And the art isn't looking at, a amazing Otis Redding full-length leather jacket that when you see it, you're like, yeah, he's a presence. He's got that. The art is hearing Otis Redding singing These Arms of Mine, right? And it's not about the stuff. It's about that. And then you got to go one step further. It's not just about that recording of These Arms of Mine. What it is, it's for me remembering dancing with my daughter, standing on my feet when she was, waist high, to These Arms of Mine, and swaying there, and just thinking, like, when I hear that song, that's what I think of. And I have a feeling there's people all over this country that when they hear that song, they think of something similar. And if we can bring that out, like if we can spark that, that's the magic and power of our museum.
You've done 18 songs so far with your podcasts. Which ones has been your favorite?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. You've got a cool voice too. I have a hard time with favorites of any of my songs. First of all, I just want to bask in the afterglow of 18 songs once more. Thank you. That was 18 songs. Like, seriously, this has been making songs to these podcast guests has been as much work as any song I ever put on an album, from the assembling it to everything. It's a different art form for me, and it's very interesting, and it's an interesting way to get into the heads of my interviewees, because, I'm not really an interviewer by trade, and sometimes I might miss a way in. Like, I don't feel like I'm the interview whisperer, but something about looking for the song in our conversation has given me more of an understanding. And that's another way that art can help life. I can understand them more by making them a co-writer than I could understand them just as a person. It gives me another end. I don't have a favorite. I was cooking along for a while where everyone was better than the one before, I feel like. or I was learning something about them. I felt really good about the Bob Saget one because I felt like Bob has this melancholy in his voice and in himself. And he's a good friend of mine, so I know this about him. And he's funny too. But when he sings, it's melancholic. And he was singing to a major key, and I got to put him in a minor key, unbeknownst to him, and kind of highlight that. And I like that. I loved the Marianne Williamson one because I feel like it sort of gave anthemic voice to. She's an anthemic writer. Like, she writes one-liners that are like worthy of songs. What else? I really enjoyed working on the John Batiste one because John Batiste is a very complex person. It's easy to see him as an entertainer, or it's easy to see him as a genius, or it's easy to see him as, a virtuoso, or just another musician but he's very complex. And it meant I spent 3 weeks every day just sorting through everything that John said because I felt a great responsibility to deliver a brilliant musician's complexity through song. So I can't say which is my favorite, but those are three. I really loved working on Ruby Amanfu's I Like Myself because, again, I feel like I found somebody. Ruby's an old friend of mine, but I feel like I found something else about Ruby through just playing with the song. She wasn't even there, and we were collaborating. So, but thanks for letting me take a little trip down recent memory lane and basking in the success of 18 songs. That's 2 albums worth of stuff. There's a theme here you've mentioned a couple times, and I could almost say it's people, not things, or people, not stuff. You could say ideas, not material, or whatever. And it makes me think about, and I'll tie this into the RCA room now with my huge thanks to you for writing that open letter to help save the RCA Studio in Nashville, which was a fight that my manager and I had taken on to preserve something which was slated for demolition. So for the kids at home, there's a studio. It's really old. Lots of records made in it. Beautiful place. Not particularly anything to write home about in terms of architecture, but in terms of history, just you don't even know. Yeah. And we were having a hard time because those fights aren't often won. The developers usually come in and they mow it down, and CNN might put it on TV, and it's gone, and that's it. And that's where we were heading. And you and some others who had some who people took seriously wrote letters in support, and yours was a huge, I feel, a game changer. And I always wanted to thank you for that. So thank you.
You're very welcome. It was an honor to weigh in and to know that sometimes that out of town voice is important sometimes.
Totally.
And that space, as you're well aware, and listeners, you should Google it because some of the most amazing recordings of the last half a century were made there, and thanks to the good work of Ben and his manager, recordings are still being made there. And you're going to be surprised when you look at the lineage in the songs. And these are important sacred spaces that we do have to preserve. Even better when they're not just a guided tour with a roped off area, but they're still a living, breathing place where music is made, art is made, people are connected.
I completely agree. And the thing is, as we were talking, it occurred to me that, it was, when it came to what to do with this building, it was Mike and me, Mike's my manager, on one side, and the Bradley and Atkins estates and families on the other, who I look up to I can't look up anymore. And I almost felt like, do you not understand? We love you. We want your great work to be preserved. What they were saying to us, and what I wanted you to talk about, they were saying it's people, not things. They were saying it was ideas, not places. They were saying this is a building. Do you understand that the greatness that happened in the building, nothing to do with the building, and now the building is worth something, and we would like to sell it because we worked hard and we have a private piece of property, and now we've got this little shit from North Carolina coming along telling us what to do with our property. And if he thinks he's going to make great music because he's in a studio, he needs to have a good idea instead. And I actually can make their argument.
Yeah.
Still, let me hear a curator and a museum view on this unremarkable piece of architecture that has no ideas that I was trying to save.
They're well-framed question. And it really speaks to the there is a power in the objects. There's a power in the places. Growing up in the Philadelphia area, every old house, they said George Washington slept here.
That's right.
It gets a little tiresome, but there's something where you can connect and be as close to the spirits that inhabited the place and the feeling. And I with all due respect to the Atkins family, there's a reason why those rooms sounded the way they did. And I think there's something special there. That's there. But we look at these sort of spaces as being sacred, and I think it's the people that walk there, and it's the amount of history that was made. And it's not the same when you knock it down and put a plaque up and say, on this site, this happened.
Right.
You've got to really feel it and walk the actual spaces. And I think that in answer to their question, if you ask any artist that's walking into those studios today, do they feel something different than walking into some place down the block that's brand new? I think the answer is yes. I think that's why you are so captivated in wanting to preserve this. And where I think is the bigger challenge is it's always difficult to think of your own lifetime as worthy of study and preservation. And so you were actually looking at it in a next generation, whereas Chet's family was probably looking at it as that was the place of work. And it's very, very challenging to document your own history and to think it's worthy of study. But
right.
if it's the same objects from somebody 40 years earlier, you think it's pretty interesting. So that's I think that's a little bit more of it. And today, does that mean we preserve split level suburban houses with brown couches and someday that's going to be a museum? Well, it's quite possible, yes, but you can't think that way when you grew up in that circumstance.
Right. Yeah, no, and that just goes to show how on the edge, of the past and the future, you're riding the present in your line of work. Like you have to be has to be a certain amount of self-awareness of where pop culture is actually going this moment and how it feels in the moment, because you don't have the luxury of looking back 200 years.
Yeah. It helps. I'll share one way we're doing that at the museum is we've got these great history exhibits, right, that show these things, but we continue to inject new energy and contemporary looks into them. Thankfully we can have live music. We can have contemporary artists play. And then we took our second floor of our museum, and it might be a bit of a metaphor for our conversation maybe. And it used to be where we told the story of the pioneers, Les Paul, Sam Phillips, Alan Freed, these massive figures. And we integrated them into the general exhibitions, and we gutted the entire floor, and we call it the garage, and we made it look like a prototypical garage or loft. We have Tellys, we have Fender Tellys, we have Fender Strats, we have SGs, we have Gibson Les Pauls, we have Martin guitars, DW drums, and the whole place is set up for visitors to just jam with each other.
Oh, that's fun.
I believe that somebody that has never played guitar, when they put the weight of a Les Paul around their neck and they plug it in and fire it up, they're having an experience that's highly educational, highly inspirational. And it's become our most popular space in the museum. It isn't hyper gamified. It's set up, there's minimal digital technology. It's like a purely analog experience for people. And when people visit, they will walk in, and somebody may have played drums in high school and they haven't picked up drumsticks in 30 years, and they get behind the kit and they're transported, and their kids look at them differently. They're like, we didn't know you could do that. And people sing along the songs. When artists are visiting, we had Booker T in there jamming with visitors. We had the members of Metallica jamming with visitors when they were visiting the museum. And it's become this place, and it's not just fun and games. It's right there to our mission to engage, teach, and inspire through the power of rock and roll. And it is giving them that connection, that spark, that inspiration. And when we've done that, we've really succeeded.
Whatever you think it is, what advice you would give and what exercise you would give us to do for this week?
Wow. That's I love it. And no, I didn't really prep for it, but in keeping with our previous conversation, I would ask that it's in keeping with music as well. And music is is life, and it's sometimes whatever your creative endeavor is, you probably have music involved in it. I would encourage folks for the next week to ditch their old reliable playlist, ditch their old favorites, and step out a little bit, change their listening for a couple days. And you could use a few jumping off points. One is there's so much, great internet radio that you could go to a place like an XPN or this place, the Summit, and let them drive for a little while, and just be exposed to something that may be different than your typical. People fall back to playlists, and they fall back to their choices. We can listen to music, whether it's on vinyl or whether it's on our laptops or our phones or wherever, and we can listen to music. And I really like that. But radio is also companionship. And you listen for that. And I would encourage folks to give that a whirl, and give it a listen, and put up with the ads, right? We have short attention spans. We want to fast forward through the ads, but put up with it. And just give that a listen. If you're commuting, turn off your usual stuff and listen. And if you're working at home, go to one of these online stations or tune in the old style and have that while you're sitting in the kitchen having your coffee and see what happens.
A couple of things I'm thinking about. Anyone listening who was thinking about embarking upon a career in the music business as a musician, like songwriter, or musician, side person, whatever. And you normally would look, if you were going to look to someone to give you advice, would more likely be someone like me than you, because I do it. But I think that I would really be interested in probably the advice or observations from you might be more helpful to a kid coming up, as you're constantly immersed in seeing what has worked, why it has worked. I think a lot of people don't realize how long you have to not make it before you make it, for instance. You will understand the trajectory of hard work to get there. What are the things that you would tell, or that you do tell classes or individuals who are going to be musicians one day? What's your perspective and take on it?
Yeah,
on advice for these kids?
Well, to pick up on what you referenced, I underscore to them that the artists, especially those in the Hall of Fame, but the artists that do this and make a living at it, you may have the perception that they've partied all night and rolled out of bed at 6 o'clock in the evening and played, but they're actually working on their scales. They're rehearsing a ton. They're writing a ton. And odds are they're multi-instrumentalists. You may only know them as one thing, but they just do it all. And it's hard work. So there's going to be plenty of people that never get out of their kitchen, and that's okay. And there's plenty of folks that have other jobs and they do this. But if you really want to do it, you've got to commit and you've got to go. And then I get some firsthand experience with this because my son is a up and coming songwriter, and I'm trying not to meddle too much. But at the same time, I've encouraged him and others like him, really get experience playing live, build a local following in your region, and get connected to other musicians so it's not an isolating activity. And then, there is the whole digital component today where you've got to write good songs. You've got to be pretty good at producing because you're going to produce yourself probably. And then you have to also know how to share it and get it out there to the world. Ideally, find others that maybe don't want to write songs and don't want to produce, but they want to market, and pair up with them. I think that there's a funny thing with young people in general, whether it's with music or other activities today. And I think that everything is so visible that they're kind of a little, compared to the way we were, they're not used to making mistakes. Like they think that it has to be perfect. And that's, rock and roll is not perfect. And even in things that you do in life, you have to make mistakes, and you have to, things have to not work out, and it's not going to get picked up. But you're going to go at it again and go at it again. And I do think there's this sense that people would rather polish a singular piece and share that as opposed to creating a little more volume and better understanding who they are. So I do encourage, everybody to take chances, make mistakes. If you're playing alone, collaborate, get some other voices into the mix. And I'm second guessing a lot of my advice at the moment because I'm thinking about
that's advice.
What's that?
That's the nature of advice, I guess, isn't it? Yeah.
And especially in the last year and a half, it's been so strange. And that whole idea of encouraging them, find out where the other musicians that do what you do gather. Ben, remember when you'd go hear a band that you liked and you'd meet people in the audience that you didn't know. And you were like, if you like this band and I like this band, we've got something in common. And, that's kind of was the foundational piece for meeting people that you did things with. And the last year and a half has curtailed that a bit.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you could say it might have cultivated it digitally.
Oh, good point. Mm-hmm.
But I think that like with the museum and with things and with my RCA building that I cared so much about, it's not vapid to be, in need of the tactile, what you can touch, see in front of you, whether it's a cobblestone street in Philadelphia that you go, oh, I bet you Benjamin Franklin walked across this a bunch of times. Yeah. There's something, that's the only way you're really going to connect. You can connect through the history books, and that's huge, but that doesn't make as much of a difference until you actually see it, and you're like, that's what it was. And I think that's the same for seeing a band. If you see a band in a room, all our sort of dopamine levels or whatever are probably spiking at the same times. And you can feel that on the same, beer-stained floor. There is something to that. So I think that's kind of, that's sort of where I stand. Do you see, think about like Nat King Cole, And how many people it took to put together one of his songs. Let's say there's 2 songwriters, there's an arranger, there's a producer, there are engineers, there's an A&R person. I mean, there's so many moving parts, may even be a vocal arranger. Then you think about little old us in our apartments doing it all by ourselves. From a historian, a rock and roll historian's perspective, where does that take us? Is that dark, or is that freeing and wonderful?
I think that it's freeing and wonderful, because it's really put the ability to capture somebody's creativity in a very democratic way. So I think that is freeing. I think that the challenge is that it by its nature, then everything's very fragmented. So it speaks a little bit to the digital accessibility, which is pretty remarkable. I'll go at it from not so much from a distribution, but from a learning side. Like a good friend that was a crazy blues fan used to keep a list of 78s in his wallet when he was going to record stores in the 80s to find certain records, right? Wherever he was traveling.
This guy sounds like me.
So, you'd be looking for those. And I was with him, this is now a couple years, and we were talking music, and he said, my 18-year-old daughter knows more about the blues than I'll ever know. I said, what? You're this guy? And he said, no. So I taught her some things, and now she can sit at her kitchen table, with her coffee and click on a link and see, let's just take it. She can be watching a Buddy Guy performance, and pretty soon it's Muddy Waters at Newport, like original clear footage. And then there's a comment from some guy in Belgium that you should check out this link, and they've got Son House, recorded on some Canadian TV show, and the footage is there, and so on and so on. He goes, it's unbelievable. And so
it is.
From a learning side, to be able to dig in that deep and do all that stuff, digital is amazing, right?
Yeah.
On experiencing live, that's a whole. I still believe in live. I still believe there's a transformational thing that happens with performers and audiences and things like that. But for distribution, I guess I like it. I'm still a radio person too. So I listen to some AAA radio. There's a station up here called The Summit that's remarkable. Was raised on WXPN in Philly, and still
one of the best.
Absolutely. And then The Current out of Minneapolis, I think, and some others that I believe in. There's something about letting other people curate it and lead you, as opposed to you having to find it. Now, I do worry that people that are going pure digital and making their own sort of list and finds are getting stuck in these lanes, and they're not getting that surprise and delight that comes through on a Sunday morning on a radio show from somebody that's helping you, expose you to more. And there's something about that, I think, that's magical. I don't know if you ever did this when you were touring, but I remember driving around a bunch with some bands in the 80s. And then even now when I travel, I love getting AM radio and flipping it down to the left side of the dial and seeing what in the heck's out there. And you still get some regional music and some regional stuff, and it's kind of a magical.
Wow. I didn't know that. I didn't know that still existed.
It's a little bit, but you can hear, some Spanish language broadcasts when you're in the Southwest, right. And sort of these connected things it's still out there in a small scale.
Well, when I was a kid in North Carolina, I didn't realize that some of the popular regional bands weren't heard of outside of. I thought they were internationally known. And it was only when I went off to college at the University of Miami and I would bring up someone that I thought was famous. They're like, Then I thought about it. It's like, of course, they were waiting tables too. Like, I don't know. I thought they were huge, and they're still giants in my world, like, because that's what I grew up with. I think of the bands like there's a band called the DBs. You may not know them, but to me, that's a huge band. And even a band called the Other Mothers, who you would never know, because they were building cabinets and waiting tables, and they do other things. But I thought they were hugely famous. But I don't think that's a thing anymore. Like, I don't think kids grow up. I think they know that stuff is nothing's famous. Really?
I think the challenge there, right? They can see how many spins, how many views they had, or how many listeners or followers, and you immediately bucket stuff that way. Whereas if it's instead the DBs on stage transporting you, they might as well be the Rolling Stones that night.
Totally. Yeah. You don't. When you're the filter, that must be no fun in a way. I mean, it's like, everyone thought they knew what needed to be played on the radio. If it didn't get on the radio, it wasn't anything. And the DJ had the control of that. And I might think that the Other Mothers need to be on the radio, and I'm indignant because they're not on the radio. That must be a thing if you are curating and putting together things for a Hall of Fame, especially when it's a moving target and the present tense is still making rock and roll of the same people who are in your how do you deal with do you get hate mail and stuff? Like my uncle needs to be in the Hall of Fame, you asshole. Like, you get stuff.
The short answer is yes. And it's pretty interesting. I try and respond to incoming emails and letters, but if they're hateful or threatening, no, they're on their own. And occasionally we pin them on the wall. It's frequently in response to who gets nominated or who gets elected. And here's the challenge with it, right? Advocate for who you believe in, but don't insult those that were honored to say that they don't belong, right? And usually when you dig into it, they're advocating for some band, and you tend to you build maybe it's unfair, but a stereotype of who's advocating. And usually the bands that they're very angry about, it comes down to they're afraid. They don't understand that culture. It can have overtones where they don't, a lot of the vitriol is aimed toward hip hop. And, that ship has sailed. We've inducted a number of hip hop artists into the museum, into the Hall of Fame. And it's not about, it fits into the umbrella. It's about an attitude and a spirit. And so you get some overtones that are a little unpleasant in those pieces.
Like, that's not rock and roll. It's the only thing besides comedy that has been rock and roll over the last 20 years, in my opinion.
So there's that. We used to get, earlier was more email. Occasionally we still get printed written letters, sometimes scrawled in black Sharpie, that are telling us what idiots we are. And every now and then you'd get a long phone call. It sounded like it was from somebody at a bar late at night complaining about something. But back to the idea of picking and selecting. There is an important thing. Like, we're conscious in the museum. Like, we curate what you're hearing. We want you to. We don't want to just leave it up to random. We want you to hear stuff that we feel is super important and super emblematic of whatever it is. If it's Women's History Month, we're featuring female artists and we're playing them. If it's February and Black History Month, we're featuring African American artists, and we really think about that. And then the other part is we would rather book original artists, up and coming artists, established artists, original bands than the greatest party bands in the world. We really want to foster and encourage original art and original artists. I get it that other bands make a living and people like hearing that, but that's not. We're about authenticity, and to be authentic, we would rather have a three-piece original band thrashing away that maybe is off a little bit than having the greatest cover band in the world on our stages. Just not what we're about. Well, I appreciate it. And if there's anything that we need to follow up on, let me know. This has been great fun. If you ever want to do it again, I'd be honored.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, let's keep in touch. And I'll get to Cleveland again someday. Hi, if you're enjoying listening to Lightning Bugs, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It helps a lot. Thank you so much for watching Lightning Bugs on YouTube. Check out more episodes and subscribe if you have not already. You can also listen to Lightning Bugs wherever podcasts may be found.